Hey everyone, I'm Noctis Corvus, but you can call me Noctis. Today will be the last video of the year, so I sort of wanted to do something to make note of this time, and to sort of look back at the art this year that I've made, and to celebrate it. Who knows, I may end up making this a sort of tradition here, since it is also nice to end the year on a simpler video format, given how busy this time of year can prove to be. I mean, I very nearly didn't get this one done or prepared in time, as I may have chosen to do this at the very last minute. But we can just get straight into it, since this will be a shorter video than I'm used to working on, and this is mainly because I didn't exactly go into this with a plan of sorts, and I really had been working with the bare basics of an idea that I would be developing before anything else. I mean, I knew my intent and went from there. You see, I simply wanted to format the favourite image from each month into a single display that showed off the images in their own way, to then, at a glance, show what this year has seen and what this year has made. Now, with that all said as well, I knew that I would have to crop the images and the drawings to fit into each frame, and I figured that it worked best as a snapshot of a larger image that I have done. I did all of this so I could then talk about the art itself during this voiceover, and kind of look at everything I chose to include. But before we start covering each image, I do want to just say here that the channel has videos exploring and expanding on all of these drawings individually. I originally wrote this script and it was way too long to realistically get in everything when editing, so I will likely be focusing in on the themes between the drawings that made me choose them, and really only narrowing in on any that are chosen for individual reasons. This mainly being October, or the ones that stand out. Otherwise, each will get a very brief covering, but I won't be able to go into as much depth as I may have wanted to. With that said, the reasons that I picked a drawing simplify down into two main categories, with one outlier when I look at it overall. So let's look at the first reason most of these were chosen. I call this category, I just like them, since the reasoning really boils down to the idea that I hold personal preference for them, and the outcome is something that I still find interesting, unique, or I had fun with originally and I remember enjoying it. These drawings are mainly January, April, May, August, and November and December. You see, for January, I like the premise of the image and I still have notes from that dream that inspired the drawing. The outcome came together with a little bit of a challenge, yet I feel like I learned a new skill from it and I built confidence in some that I hadn't but didn't use often. Then for April, the design was fun, and I still like a lot of the details that included across the character, alongside what I did with the threads. For both of these, I actually felt like putting their test print on my wall, with the other art prints that I have from other artists, and they kind of fit in well, and they've been up there since. I've only recently moved them as I'm getting new prints to put on the wall as well. For context, I usually leave the test prints on a shelf in the cupboard, as that kind of lets me reference how the file prints when I'm going to make more of them, and it gives me something to reference back to for pictures and examples of the print. Now, for May, I felt like the environment was fun, and that the challenges of the ruins paid off in the end, and everything came together in that sense. The design of the character is interesting, and the eyes are a detail that simply grab attention on the page. In the same breath, I like the detail of the circle around the character and how the Reaper comes across with there being many subtle details tied between everything here and there. For example, I don't know if I ever touched on it in the original video, but looking back, the eyes almost form a clock around the character, which I really enjoy. Now, for August, November and December, the ideas are some that I've looked at before, yet these have been the outcomes of them that I like the most. For example of this, August's is the drawing of the hourglass, and I have looked at these quite a few times before, including once for a project in school. Yet this time I like this attempt more than those I've done in the past. The idea was fun, and I got to try new things with it, and that was the one where I ended up with 4 outcomes from the process. Not to mention that it's the best attempt I have at conveying this singular idea, and for that reason it's my favourite from that month. For November, I've looked at statues and winged beings before, but this one had an atmosphere that felt more alive, and there were details of interest to it that the others tended to just lack. In December, I may have had fewer choices, but it is still an appealing and an interesting image, where the details add to the overall effect and I can enjoy what it's done for the world building and the moments that I'm working with as well. What I mean by that is I might have tripped myself up along the way. I can look at this drawing and see the world building, and I can also see the symmetry and new techniques and new tools and different things that I was able to do with it, and different experiments that I might want to carry into next year as well. In short though, these are all the drawings that, when it is said and when everything is done, I just have a personal bias towards for whatever the reason may be, whether it is for the memory of the drawing, liking the finished look, or simply finding the idea interesting and fun. There isn't much more to say about them though, as they have something to appeal to me before anything else, and that is why they're my favourites. Moving swiftly on though, the second reason that I chose these drawings is that I liked the technique that went into them, or that they were a successful attempt at trying something new. For example, the drawing I chose for March, the drawing of the portal forest in the door, was a more painterly approach to my usual process, where I left a few more things as impressions of items and objects, and that was so I could focus the details where they were needed, and so it looked complete through that. In a similar sense, the drawing I chose for June, the one of the winged figures in the purple hues, was an experiment I did for gradient maps, and it was a tool and a trick that I'd seen on Clip Studio and I'd seen others use, but I hadn't tried myself. And this was an overall major success. It is still one of my favourite drawings of the year, evident by it being in this video. Now, just a quick side note whilst I am mentioning June, I did this video going off the dates in my files, and this one falls under June rather than July, yet I posted that video in July. I didn't want to go off video dates in the event that one of my favourites had ended up being a drawing I did off camera, or that I didn't post, and I still would have wanted to include it for me. So now I'm setting that rule for now and future years that it's going off the files from when I drew them, as that also kind of reflects the year a bit better. There are times where I could draw something a month before and only upload a video a month later with schedules, timing, and just what I want to do. So that's why I've kind of implemented this case. Back on topic. The months that I chose that fall under this category are February, March, June, July, and September. For March, I developed the idea of working with impressions more than strict descriptions, and I let myself explore the painterly approach in the bushes. The outcome wasn't one that I loved straight away, but now I find it cool, and there is something appealing that makes it fun to look at. In February, I was working on backgrounds and the bubbles, whilst it was also one of the first times I used the different pencil tools to create the detailed scribbles in the background on a smaller scale, that kind of was done to be random but give a sense of detail or there being something there. I didn't just settle for a simple gradient like I would have otherwise been inclined to do. In June, I became comfortable with gradient maps, and it was my first time seriously sitting down to work it out. I gained the understanding of how it worked with values and the settings that they required, so that now I can include it in more of my other works in a slightly different way, and that wouldn't have happened without this drawing or trying something here. In July and September, I worked on new ideas and new ways of working. July saw me trying to make it seem like the world of the dream was caving in and the rift opening and things falling apart. It made sense that in this situation, I would be experimenting, and I managed to make something that looked good and still felt like some parts of it was missing. It really was also the case where I managed to capture the sense of the dream, and that was something I was very proud of myself for, since it was a weirder dream as well. It wasn't really something that I could easily explain or easily show, and there was multiple developments that went into that. Then, with September, I kind of continued from March and embraced a more painterly approach, and I just messed with marks and a new process until I developed this eye. I then worked into it and made it a bit more detailed, but it was also something fun because it was a subject that I often work with and I often doodle. I often am doodling eyes whenever I can on whatever I can, so it was fun to just do a drawing of a giant eye, and I could also then look at how my painting approaches may tie into my digital approaches. I forgot the word for it then. Either way though, they all came together. I favour them as they all show that the processes and experimenting leads to success and interesting outcomes between those that fail. They are fun and they are slightly different, and I enjoyed making them too. Now, between all of these, there is one drawing that I chose for none of the reasons above. You see, October was chosen for what it represents and it reminds me of as an image. During that month, I went to see Hadestown in London, which is something I've wanted to do for a while, a good few years now. I love the music and I've wanted to see it on stage for years, as I've said, and I finally was able to go and see it as a purpose of a trip. I went with my mum, and we had a few days in London to specifically see Hadestown and to do a few other things before we left. Like also seeing the Phantom of the Opera, since it's a show that my mum's wanted to see for a while. This drawing is something I made in response to that trip. I made the video and I titled it as an art diary, since I was using this to remember the trip and to create something from that experience of finally getting to see it. The images were meant as a collage, and it was meant as a partial recount for what I enjoyed about the show, the moments and the characters that I liked, and the little references in the art to Hadestown. So when picking a favourite, it only made sense to me that I chose this as it represents one of my favourite moments from the year as a whole. I suppose if anything it would also fall under the second category, where it was also something that I tried new things with that worked out well. I tried to make it look like a collage of images and paper, as that was a motif in the brochure that I wanted to be inspired by. But overall, it was a favourite for what it represented, and I simply couldn't just ignore that overall. Though before we wrap up here, I should briefly mention something about this drawing. I originally thought that I would simply add the plain frames and then put the imagery inside these frames and call it a day. I didn't even know if it would be a video, or if it would just be something I posted on socials later. Only, once I did put them in the frames, it felt simple and dull. And it wasn't really a celebration of this year in the work, it was just a display. So I went through it as you've seen for most of this video, and I added a motif from the image to the frame and kind of expanded on it that way. For January, I chose the roses, since those were one of the key details from the woman and it made the most sense. It was a key detail in the image, and so I pulled on that. February saw the lines from the background, as this experiment is partly why I chose to include this drawing overall. It also was the detail best pulled out of those outcomes, as it was the point of experimentation as well. For March, it was the leaves and the plants from the image and done in the same style to keep it consistent, and to also celebrate the loose style that made up this experiment from that month. I also really like how the front plants turned out even now, so I wanted to include a few of them. In April's, there were the clocks from the character and the threads that wrap around them, as this was central to both the design and the framing, and it was where they had the same glow from it. I think that might have been the first time I did the duplicate of the layer and then added a blur to it as a glow, but I might be wrong on that front. For May's border, there were the eyes, as this is what stood out from the character and the framing that I chose for this display, and it proved the best suited for the role. I was stuck on it for a bit, but did it thinking that I would change it if I had to, but I liked it when it was done. In June, I again went with the lines and the patterns from the image, since it stood out as something to mimic, and it visibly tied back even now into everything. I also remembered that they were really fun to draw, and I wanted to do it again. July's was the crack and some moths, since, again, it was central to the idea and the original drawing, and the moths were a fun detail that I didn't get to include in this display, so I wanted to include them in some capacity as they were really fun to draw and I love moths. August, November and December saw me using the plants and the bushes from their framing in a different style, since it best fit rather than anything else. I know this is the most repetitive motif, yet it was interesting and it suited them all whilst adding it as a theme and coherence, and it almost doubled as showing me how often I do this. I mean, it was also in the regular way I do leaves, so it made the most sense that it ended up this way. Then September and October saw me using motifs from the image itself. September is the scribbling and the mixing that I did for the eye to get the overall effect, whilst also leaving the border visible. And then in October's frame, I took the flower from Hadestown and added it like a sticker to a few places, before also adding hatching marks that I used in the image itself. In both of these, I mainly took the techniques and the appearance from the image and expanded on it, and kind of made it look like part of the image was on the frame as well. It's similar to what I've done for some others, but it was more relying on lines and marks rather than anything else. But overall, these frames brought it all together, and it kind of made sense, and it made me match the small and subtle details of the background, so that I could actually call all of this finished. It also made the frames feel unique, and it celebrated the images inside of it rather than just holding them. It made it so everything was more coherent, and everything felt more as a celebration than just me showing off which ones I consider my favourite. Now, with all of that being said, we are out of time for this video. It is a shorter one, and it is something where I have had to kind of be brief in my reasonings for these images, and what I wanted to do with each of them. But it has also been a very good way of wrapping up this year and looking back at my personal favourite drawings from each month overall. For now, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Next year, I am looking to including new forms of videos here, and doing a few new ideas that I've had in my process and ideas for quite some time. Yet, I will expand on that all at a later date. For now, have a wonderful day, and goodbye!